Have you ever walked into a restaurant, a market, a taxi, or a tourist attraction in the Philippines and suddenly realized that the price seems a little higher because you look like a foreigner? Maybe you've heard the expression skin tax. It's not an official tax. There is no government fee for having white skin, being European, American, Australian, or simply looking like a tourist. Instead, skin tax is a popular expression foreigners sometimes use when they believe they're being charged more than locals simply because they are perceived to have more money. But is it really happening? Is it discrimination? Is it just normal tourist pricing? Or are some foreigners misunderstanding how prices work in the Philippines? Today, we're going to take a balanced look at the phenomenon, where foreigners may experience it, why it happens, and most importantly, how you can deal with it without becoming frustrated or disrespectful. Let's start with the basics. When foreigners talk about skin tax in the Philippines, they're usually referring to situations where a person believes they are being charged more because they look foreign. For example, imagine you're buying something at a local market. A Filipino customer pays 100 pesos. You ask for the same product and suddenly the price becomes 200 pesos. You might immediately think, I'm paying a foreigner tax. And sometimes you may actually be correct. But there is an important distinction. Not every difference in price is automatically a skin tax. Tourists often don't know the local price. A seller may see an opportunity to negotiate. A vendor may assume that a foreign customer has a higher budget. Or the seller may simply quote an opening price because bargaining is expected. Understanding that difference can save you a lot of unnecessary frustration. One of the most common places is local markets and informal commerce. If you're shopping in a tourist area, prices may be flexible. You ask, how much? The seller gives you a price. You can decide whether you want to negotiate. Another area can be transportation. If you're using an informal taxi, tricycle, motorcycle ride, or private transport arrangement, always understand the price before getting in. Then there are services. Maybe you're hiring someone to repair something, carry luggage, arrange transportation, guide you around town, or provide another personal service. A foreigner may sometimes receive a higher initial quote. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean the person is trying to scam you. It may simply be an assumption that foreigners have more disposable income. And in some cases, there really are people who intentionally charge foreigners more. The important thing is to recognize the difference between negotiation, tourist pricing, and outright deception. There are several reasons. First, there is a major difference in purchasing power. A price that feels expensive to a Filipino local may seem very cheap to someone earning a Western salary. For example, an additional 100 or 200 pesos may not seem significant to a foreign visitor. But for a local customer, it can represent a meaningful amount of money. Second, tourism creates different markets. Hotels, restaurants, tours, transportation providers, and attractions often develop prices specifically for tourists. That's not unique to the Philippines. You see similar practices all over the world. Third, bargaining is part of everyday commerce in many places. The first price isn't always the final price. And finally, some sellers simply believe foreigners are wealthy. If someone sees a foreigner carrying expensive equipment, staying in a resort, or arriving from a wealthy country, they may assume that person can afford a higher price. That assumption isn't always fair, but it does happen. This is where the conversation becomes more complicated. A foreigner might call it skin tax, but what the seller is actually responding to could be tourist status rather than skin color. Imagine two people walking into a market. One is Filipino and clearly lives locally. The other is a foreign tourist carrying luggage and speaking English with a noticeable accent. The seller may immediately understand that the second person is a tourist. The price difference may have nothing to do with race or skin color. It's about perceived purchasing power and the expectation that tourists don't know local prices. That's why it's better to think of skin tax as a slang expression rather than a precise economic or social category. Here's something foreigners sometimes don't want to hear. Sometimes we contribute to the problem ourselves. Imagine walking into a small local market and immediately saying, "That's only $2. For you, it may be incredibly cheap. But the seller may hear, "This person doesn't care about the price." If foreigners consistently pay inflated prices without asking questions, sellers may learn that they can charge tourists more. Another mistake is showing off money. If you're carrying expensive watches, designer clothing, or expensive electronics and then aggressively complain about a small price difference, you may create an uncomfortable situation. The best approach is usually simple. Be polite. Know approximately what things should cost. Ask the price before agreeing, and negotiate calmly when negotiation is appropriate. The first strategy is research. Before visiting a market, learn approximate local prices. You don't need to know the price of everything. Just understand the general range. Second, ask locals you trust. If you're staying in the Philippines for a longer period, Filipino friends or neighbors can often tell you whether a quoted price is reasonable. Third, compare prices. Don't immediately accept the first offer. Walk around. Ask another seller. You'll quickly get a better idea of the normal price. Fourth, use established businesses when transparency matters. Restaurants with menus, supermarkets, shopping malls, ride-hailing services, and businesses with clearly displayed prices can reduce uncertainty. And finally, learn a little Filipino. Even simple phrases like magkano, how much, or pwedeng tawad, can you lower the price, can make everyday interactions easier. This is perhaps the most important part. If someone tries to charge you 50 or 100 pesos more than you expected, don't let that ruin your entire day. I've seen foreigners become extremely angry over relatively small amounts. They start shouting. They accuse everyone of being dishonest. And suddenly, a small pricing disagreement becomes a major confrontation. Ask yourself, is this really worth ruining my day? Sometimes the answer is yes, particularly if you've been seriously scammed. But sometimes the difference is simply the price of being a tourist in an informal marketplace. You don't have to accept an unfair price, but you also don't have to turn every negotiation into a battle. It's also important to understand the Filipino perspective. Many Filipinos are extremely welcoming toward foreigners, and most people you encounter are simply trying to work, operate a business, or earn a living. A foreign visitor may have a salary many times higher than the income of the person selling a product. That doesn't automatically justify charging more, but it helps explain why some sellers may think differently about pricing. There is also an important cultural factor. Filipino hospitality can sometimes make people uncomfortable with direct confrontation. So if you believe you've been quoted an unfair price, aggressive behavior is rarely the best solution. A smile, a polite question, and walking away can often solve the problem. There is a difference between bargaining and being deliberately deceived. If someone clearly tells you one price and then demands a dramatically higher amount afterward, that's different. If a taxi refuses to use the agreed fare or meter without a valid reason, that's different. If you're pressured into paying for something you never agreed to, that's different. And if you feel threatened or unsafe, your priority should always be your safety, not winning an argument over money. Document serious incidents when appropriate and use reputable businesses and official channels for complaints. Remember, being a foreigner doesn't mean you should accept being exploited. But being a foreigner also doesn't mean every higher price is automatically exploitation. If you're living in or visiting the Philippines, here's the mindset I recommend. Don't walk around thinking, everyone is trying to scam me. That attitude will make you suspicious of everyone. Instead, think, I know that prices can vary, so I'll stay informed. That's a much healthier approach. Learn the local prices. Use reputable services. Ask questions. Negotiate when appropriate. And respect the people you're dealing with. You will probably encounter situations where you pay more than a local. Sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes it's because you're a tourist. Sometimes it's because you didn't know the normal price. And sometimes you simply got a bad deal. It happens. The goal isn't to make sure you pay exactly the same amount as every Filipino everywhere you go. The goal is to understand the environment well enough that you can make informed decisions. So, does the skin tax exist in the Philippines? Sometimes, yes. But the reality is more complicated than the expression suggests. Foreigners can occasionally be quoted higher prices because they're perceived as tourists or wealthier customers. But not every price difference is discrimination. Sometimes it's bargaining, sometimes it's tourist pricing, sometimes it's simply a misunderstanding. And occasionally, yes, someone may deliberately take advantage of a foreign customer. The best defense isn't anger, it's knowledge. Know the approximate prices. Ask before agreeing. Compare when necessary. Use reputable businesses. Learn a few local phrases. And most importantly, treat people with respect. The Philippines is a country where relationships, friendliness, and personal interaction can matter enormously. If you approach people with suspicion and arrogance, you're likely to have a very different experience than someone who approaches the country with curiosity and respect. So the next time someone gives you a price that seems surprisingly high, don't immediately shout, "Skin tax!" Take a breath, ask another seller, check the normal price, negotiate politely. And if you still don't like the deal, just walk away. Because sometimes the cheapest price isn't the most important thing. The best experience comes from knowing how the local system works and enjoying the Philippines without letting a few extra pesos ruin your adventure. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell us about your own experience. Have you ever experienced what you would call a skin tax in the Philippines? Let us know in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video.